Welcome to the campus of North Idaho College and today's broadcast of the North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of North Idaho College television students. Your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Recently, we had a guest on this program that was very critical of the public educational system of this country and focused particularly upon the National Education Association in those remarks. It is only fair that we have the other side of the issue, and I'm happy to welcome to the program today Mr. Jim Shackleford, who is the Regional Director of the Idaho Education Association. Jim, we want to go through some of the questions about your organization and about public education and give you the opportunity to talk about your viewpoint and the organization and just the entire public educational system's goals and purposes. And welcome to our program.
Thank you, Tony. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and address some of the remarks that your prior guest made on this show and throughout the Northwest as he travels. I think it's we're in an interesting situation that here in the late 1900s we are debating whether or not there should be a public education system in this country. And while that is probably too bad in one respect, it certainly gives us the opportunity to revisit the question of why we as a nation committed ourselves to that particular process a long time ago. And since we have not discussed that as a nation, we've perhaps gotten to the point where we take it for granted. We look forward to the opportunity to espouse our belief publicly as to the benefits of a public education system and the improvements, in fact, that our organization, the teachers and educators everywhere, hope that it will undergo in the future.
Let's go through a preliminary explanation for the viewers who might not be very close to the organizations that you represent. First of all, there is what is known as the NEA, or the National Education Association. You are personally affiliated with the Idaho Education Association. I believe it's my understanding that each state has its own association organization, but they can affiliate with the NEA nationally. Would you take just a moment to show that relationship and how the organization is set up, both on a state basis or the national basis?
Primarily because public education is affected by governmental agencies at the local level, school boards, the local public school systems, the patrons, the community in which every school is located. At the state level, through the legislature, through all the commissions, to the State Board of Education, and at the federal level with the Department of Education, the United States Congress, the President of the United States. The teachers and public school employees of this country have decided to form an organization which would be able to effectively deal with the issues at each one of those levels. So at the national level, there's the National Education Association. At the state level, there is an affiliate of the NEA in each state. In Idaho, it's the Idaho Education Association. In Washington, it's the Washington Education Association. And at the local level, almost every school district in the country has a teachers organization which is affiliated with their state and their national affiliate. For instance, in Coeur d'Alene, it's the Coeur d'Alene Education Association, and there are differing names, but they're all three interwoven together to, we believe, accomplish the purposes and goals of the educators of this nation.
In addition to that, sometimes we hear these dialogues taking place and disputes concerning positions that are taken by this organization or others, and like many other organizations in this country, is it not correct that even though the national organization takes a stand on a significant number of issues, that does not mean that in business or labor or whatever organization it is, that every state organization agrees with every single position that's taken nationally? That's by a vote, but there's dissenting votes. Is that not correct?
Oh, that's precisely right. We believe that our organization, which happens to represent 1.7 million public school employees in this country, is the most democratic of all forms of organizations. We have an annual assembly where the issues and the positions are presented and voted on and debated, and certainly as in all kinds of democratic forums, there are people who disagree with that. But those policies become the policies of our organization, and we have chosen to try to live with those, and if we don't like them, try to work within the structure to try to get those changed, rather than dropping out and giving up on the cause in general. So certainly there are some issues with which the NEA has as policies, which the teachers perhaps in Bonners Ferry, Idaho, don't necessarily agree with. But there's a process for getting those changed, and I can tell you that the teachers in Idaho and Washington and Oregon are very active in their associations to try to be sure that the views of the people whom they represent in their local school districts are the views that are held by their local, state, and national affiliates.
Another criticism that your organization has received from speakers that do tour are those organizations that are opposed to the NEA. They contend as a interest group or pressure group that you are a PAC or a political action committee and that you spend money on endorsing candidates or taking stand on issues. My research, of course, tells me that the history of the PACs, although it's rather recent in that sense, that certainly interest groups have been around a long time contributing money to cause they believe in. But in about 1978, we received a new emphasis with the far right organizing PACs in 1978 and 1980, and they were very successful with their campaigns that they targeted. The liberals came back and learned from them and also organized for 1982 and 1984, and so groups, a lot of groups are spending lots of money. Does the NEA spend lots of money on candidates, and how would you respond to the criticism that teachers shouldn't be involved in contributing money to campaigns through their organization?
I think it's an interesting criticism, one that is obviously leveled by people who haven't given it a lot of thought. But again, I think we need to take opportunities such as this to explain it, because it's a very logical and reasonable idea that public school employees would be interested in the political process. To answer your first question, yes, the National Education Association's Political Action Committee does contribute money to people running for federal offices, congressional offices, and the office of the President of the United States. Now, the other question, though, the bottom line question is, why do we do that? Why are we involved in politics at all? Why aren't we just professionals who work in the classrooms and then we leave the political decisions to the people who are interested in politics? Well, the answer is that there are very few decisions that are made about what goes on in public schools that are not political decisions. I guess most people believe that we, as public school employees, find ourselves lobbying in the legislature for more money for teacher salaries. And while certainly I don't believe any public school teacher is ashamed anymore to admit that we do need to be paid better, and that we have the need, in fact, and the responsibility to approach legislators about that issue. The things that public school teachers have said over and over again that need to be changed, that need to be improved, or that need to be continued, cost money. And the only places that we have to look for that money are at the local, the state, or the national levels in the political arena. We don't go out and sell products necessarily to raise money. Sometimes we have fundraisers for various special causes, but in general the public school system is based upon the contributions of the patrons at the local level through property taxes, the legislators through the collection of sales taxes in the state of Idaho primarily, and at the national level through the income tax process. So unless we go to the public legislature and we say to them, here's a program that we need, and we can't fund it out of our own pockets. That's not what you employ us to do. What you employ us to do is to bring to you ideas, improvements, and criticisms for change. And here are our ideas for those things. All of a sudden, the legislators realize that means it takes some money. And so we ask them for that, and we therefore, during the campaigns, we go to legislators and we ask them, what are your feelings about public education? Do you support the concept? Do you think there needs to be some changes? If so, how would it be possible to fund those changes? And those individuals who answer the questions to to our best judgment as being responsible answers for public education in the future and the growth of this system. We believe we have responsibility to get out and try to communicate that not only to the people with whom we work, but to the public in general. Public education is like all other public entities. It's the result of political decisions, and if we do not involve ourselves in the political process, then we are in fact ignoring at least half of our professional responsibility. We certainly have the responsibility to perform and to teach in the classrooms. But the other half of that responsibility is to do whatever it is that's necessary in order to be sure that the kids have the educational opportunities, the textbooks, the curriculum, all of the materials available, and the best teachers. And that takes money, and so therefore we have to involve ourselves in the political process. So we're not ashamed of that, as a matter of fact. We understand that we subject ourselves to criticism frequently, but that is something that we have debated among ourselves and that we're committed to.
Recently, the U.S. Supreme Court dealt with the issue of the right of organizations to be organized and to spend money, PACs in particular, and indicated that under the Constitution of the United States, freedom of speech gives individuals and organizations that right. Would you like to respond to why you think that teachers and those in public education are set aside, and in some people's mind they have a different standard for them? Do they have the same right as any other citizens to participate in the political process? How would you directly answer the criticism that they should be different?
The direct answer is that teachers are not different. They're number one, they're citizens, and number two, they're interested in what it is they do for a living. I would suppose that any private employer who had an employee who was only interested in performing whatever it was that was written down on his or her job description may keep that employee, but they wouldn't be considered, especially in the professional ranks, as performing all of the responsibilities expected. That's kind of what we believe public school educators are as well. We need to be involved with the total educational program of a child, and we do not believe that you can do that adequately by simply walking into the classroom and teaching and then walking out at the end of the day. However, teachers, custodians, aides, secretaries, all of those people who work after hours on behalf of kids do that because they believe that the changes that need to be made have to be brought about by efforts outside of the classroom. We can only do so much in the classroom. If we just close our eyes, if we just put on blinders to everything else that's going on, then we are ignoring the other half of our responsibility. So we have responsibility as citizens, and we have responsibilities as educators. And while we may be criticized, we're probably being criticized by those people who think we're being too effective at what it is we do, and therefore we'll always accept that kind of criticism.
Your detractors also get into another area in addition to the political action part of the organization. They've been very severe in their criticism of the public educational system as to curriculum and teaching theory and techniques. I would like to go through a few of those criticisms and let you have the opportunity to respond to those. One such charge is that public school educators in this country have incorporated something in the system that the critics called humanism, and they criticize that and indicate that that is an attempt to replace religion in the classroom. And they follow this up by saying that the public schools in this country have contributed to the decline in the morals of our young people, and that in turn has created problems in such areas as crime. A very long, detailed charge. I know you've heard it many times before from those who are detractors. What does the Idaho Education Association say in response to those charges? And I know that that even comes up in the Idaho legislature in an attempt to pass certain legislation in criticizing the public educational system.
Well, let's start from the phrase humanism, and really it's a broader phrase that the radical right uses. The radical right, we were represented by such people as your guest last week, Mr. Blumenfeld, calls it secular humanism. And he says that that's the religion of the public education the public education system in this nation, and specifically of the National Education Association. Our response to that is one of confusion, because prior to the representatives of the radical right, mentioning to us the phrase secular humanism, I don't know of any public school employee in the nation who had ever heard of that. I certainly haven't. And I've talked to teachers all over this country. And I don't know anybody who ever heard of secular humanism before people such as Mr. Blumenfeld started telling us that was our religion. That's first of all. But let's get things straight. What is happening in this nation is that there is an attack on the concept of the tuition-free public education system. The concept that every student, that every individual, regardless of race, creed, color, or economic ability, can have the opportunity to achieve to his or her own best ability. That's what the attack is on. And the subterfuge is that there is a religious scam going on in the school system, that the teachers of this nation are teaching evil and deplorable and unmoral kinds of things in the classrooms. If you could just stop and take a minute and think about exactly what that particular position represents. Mr. Blumenfeld was in North Idaho recently, and he spoke to a meeting of citizens where he said to them, take your children out of the public school system. The public school system is evil. Well, he didn't say take your children out of the public school system in New York City or in Chicago. He said take them out of the public school system in North Idaho because these public schools are evil. They are corrupt, and they are teaching your young children evil things. All of that is based upon his belief that there is someone, somewhere, in a conspiratorial fashion, who has control of the 1.7 million professional educators in this nation to the point where they can tell them exactly what it is to teach from some place like Washington, D.C. I would hope that your audience would take just a minute and think about the public school teachers who have their children in classroom, or who teach on the college campuses that they're familiar with, or who sing in the church choir with them, or who teach in Sunday school with them, and probably who live next door to them. And ask yourself whether or not it's realistic to believe that many people, and those people who have been highly trained, who entered the profession because they wanted to help children, can be manipulated so that they are teaching values which are contrary to the majority of the population of this nation. It is an absolutely incredible situation that the radical right has set up. And they have set that up for one simple reason. They've set that up because they want to dismantle the public education system in this nation. And as I said at the outset, I think it's intriguing that we're sitting here in 1985 discussing whether or not there should be a public education system, but that is in fact what we are doing. And that is in fact what Mr. Blumenfeld and the people who believe such as he does are encouraging the masses of our citizens to do, is to get away from the public education system and go to the private system, where unfortunately all kinds of different school systems would be established. There would be school systems which were for the rich and school systems which were for the poor. School systems which had some standards internally and school systems which do not have standards internally. It obviously would be a situation where only a certain portion of the population would be educated and another portion would not be educated. It is an elitist philosophy, and those people who support that philosophy should be very forthright about it and say that what they really believe in is that everyone should not be treated equally. Everyone should not have the same opportunities.
That's a question I want to follow up on. For those who are taking that position that they want to actually abolish all public education in this country, and I would assume that would mean that obviously there's no government revenue coming into the school system, then it would be up to the parents of those children or adults themselves to pay their own way through the educational system. How would you deal with the poor in the country, children who are from low-income families, and particularly to families where there are physically handicapped parents and the children themselves, which requires very special education training? What would happen to those people in our country?
Oh, I think they would, as the common phrase is, fall through the cracks. I don't think there's any doubt about that. You know, the American public education system is a remarkable experiment. We take every child who walks through the door, every single child. Many of them are not normal children. In fact, probably very few are normal children. Many of them are handicapped. Some of them are too bright for the normal curriculum. Some of them are not bright enough for the normal curriculum. Some of them are physically and emotionally handicapped. What do you do with those children? Well, the public education system takes care of those kids. It is our charge, our responsibility, to help those kids get as far as they possibly can. In a private school system, where you might find a few schools who would agree to take that same charge, there would be no requirement to that. It's expensive. It's very expensive to take every child and build him or her individually to the point where they can be the most successful they possibly can be. The history of public schools in this nation is an honored one. And we certainly as an organization believe that those people who are saying that our association would like to see the dissolution of private education are wrong. We believe it is a very viable alternative in this country. But it is not the answer for educating the masses of the citizenry. And that's what we are all about. We are very afraid that the discipline problems, that the handicapped, the too gifted would simply not be educated, that they would be left to their own ways in order to achieve whatever it is that they possibly could. And we don't think that would be a great deal.
Also, Jim, from the educational system being developed as it has over the years, there's the accreditation process that we have in all states. And for any school system to be able to function, and certainly in the higher education system for transfer credits and so forth, certain standards have to be met. There have to be certain basic information and training for all children and adults that are in those systems. Our guest on this show last week, when asked if that was abolished, would he support in the private school system some kind of uniform standards for basic learning skills and so forth, and he indicated not, that would be up to each school to decide what they wish. Also, in response to the question, well, what would you do with a school in some locality that refused to have any of those standards? And his response was, those children would just have to fall through the cracks. Is this something that would concern you deeply as someone who supports having certain curriculum and certain standards and certain testing? If we lost that, what would happen to the educational system as we live in a very technical, complex society?
Well, there's no doubt that the quality would be seriously affected. If there are no standards, then I could send my kids down the street to Cousin Joe's private school, which he opened up for members of my family, and he gives us a good deal because we invite him over to dinner every Friday night. Cousin Joe may be a really nice guy, but he probably doesn't know anything about teaching reading. He probably doesn't know anything about the latest development in the scientific and technological world, because Cousin Joe hasn't been trained as a professional educator. He hasn't spent his life, his professional life anyway, both teaching kids and then retraining himself. The standards question is obviously a very vital one, one which, if Mr. Blumenfeld and the people that he represents are ever going to be taken credibly by at least the current educational establishment, they're going to have to respond differently than they are now. There must be some standards, there must be some qualifications, and there must be some monitoring of exactly what's going on, what people are spending their money for.
I have a follow-up question in that area. Suppose that we had such a system and we had no standards, but we still want to train brain surgeons and medical doctors, dentists, lawyers. Those high sophisticated training processes, what guidelines could they use for accepting people into those professional programs when students from all these variety of schools without any standards would be applying to them?
It'd be pretty difficult for me to send my child or my spouse or my wife or myself to any physician without having done an in-depth study on my own of exactly what his or her training. Same thing with anybody who had some advanced skills that supposedly was going to make a difference in my financial or my legal or my health concerns.
Another area that comes to mind, again, along the lines, if you remove all laws that govern this process and leave it just to those who wish to become involved in it and just to offer their services for education. We've had an awful long struggle in this country to try to promote a society in which all citizens and persons are treated on an equal basis, regardless of sex, color, and creed, and so forth. If we create a system where there were no standards, do you have any thoughts to what might happen in the area of discrimination?
Oh, I think it would be a fallback to where we were decades and decades ago, to where there was a class system created in this nation. And the classes would be divided along very simply along the lines of the economic boundaries. The rich would get richer, and the poor would not be able to have any opportunity to climb and to change and to grow and to mature into what their really innate abilities would allow them to achieve. It is an elitist system. It is a system which Mr. Blumenfeld proposes that would provide for the very best educational system for those people who could pay for it. And for those people who could not pay for it, there would be minimal opportunities. Actually, I think there is another issue that is involved here, and I think it's probably the critical issue, and that is the issue of whether or not one believes that the public school system should teach children what to think, or whether they should teach them how to think. And the radical right's version of what should be happening in public schools and in private schools is drastically different than that of our organization, and I believe the general populace of this country. We believe that it is the responsibility of this experiment, of the public education experiment, to give children the opportunity to make decisions for themselves, to explore all of the options, and to think for themselves. Whenever that is accomplished, then we have an educated citizenry. We do not have one when somebody has told me what to do and what to think.
One final area, with the little time we have left, those who oppose the public education system indicate that the educators are so liberal, yet all the polls that we see today of college students in this country, they're the most conservative college students since the 1950s, and Ronald Reagan, for example, did just very, very well among college students. So if the educational system is so liberal, how would you explain that the students of our country are getting more conservative?
Well, obviously, if we are doing all of the things that we are accused of doing, we're not doing them very well.
On that note, we'll have to bring our program to conclusion. And Jim, thank you for being with us and taking your time out of a busy schedule to explain your position to us.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Ladies and gentlemen, our guest has been Jim Shackleford, who is the Regional Director of the Idaho Educational Association, discussing that organization in public education and a defense of it and why he and others are dedicated to the public education system. I hope you've enjoyed our program and that you'll be with us again next week at this very same time. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at this same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by a North Idaho College student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.